when you are an entrepreneur in your own company, every day is all about survival. And you know that if you're not going to be successful, and you know that if you fail, you may not live to see another day in this business. Also the reward, because if you're going to be successful and you're going to grow and become a huge, massive company, whatever your desired outcome is, you know that you're going to reap a lot of those benefits. And your name is going to be on it, by the way, in terms of your legacy, etc. In a bigger company, no, I don't want anyone to kid themselves. When you're an intrapreneur or whatever you want to call it, in a bigger company, it's not the same. If you fail, you failed, but the company's going to live on. And if you're successful, then you're going to get your paycheck, and maybe you're going to get a bonus, or maybe you're going to get whatever, or great outcomes for the shareholders of the company, but you're certainly not reaping all of the benefits. And in terms of your legacy, no one's going to remember your name in a few years.
Welcome to the Haggai podcast. Buckle up. This episode is brought to you by Better Weight for Life, transformational weight loss aid, led by U.S. board-certified physicians, providing access to GLP-1 medications like Wegovy and Zepbound that are proven to help you lose weight and keep it off. This episode is brought to you by CardsBiz, a business card too good to give away.
So this is cards. This is what we make in CardsBiz. This is the black Amex of business card, made out of metal, glass polymer, engraved in real gold or silver. And basically you don't give this away. You basically tap somebody's phone and the information is shared. So you make the best impression in every meeting.
Hello, hi.
Guy, good to see you. Good to see you.
Good to see you and to be seen. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Always a pleasure, hi.
Just realized my shirt has Zion, Utah, which is one of my favorite places. But if anyone watches this video in the wrong time, they may get the wrong message. So I promise you, this is just me going out hiking with the family and having fun in a beautiful place. No political connection whatsoever.
Family friendly. So hi, how about we start? We've known each other now for a few decades. A bit scary to think it that way. But the rest
I actually thought about it.
Yeah.
I actually thought about it. I think we've known each other for 27 years. Yeah. Minus 2 from before infancy. Yeah.
Yeah. But Chai, the rest of the world does not know the greatness that is Chai. So how about you introduce yourself?
Based out of the Bay Area. I've been here for the past, I guess, 17 years, more or less, maybe 18, maybe 16. Who's counting at this point? Prior to that, born and raised in Israel. So last couple of years, maybe we'll do it in a reverse chronological order.
Yeah.
So past couple of years, I've been at a company called GoFundMe, where I run a nice portfolio of different products, businesses, initiatives, et cetera, which I'm happy to tell you and the audience more about. Prior to that, I had a very eclectic career, which spanned through a lot of startups. Some were my own, and some were other folks' startups, as well as big companies. From a big company standpoint, spent some time at Ring Central, which is a big comms company, public comms company with really cool tech. Prior to that, spent some time at my own startup, which was an e-commerce, live streaming e-commerce company. Raised some money, went to market in the US, then went to market in Brazil. I had a big team in Sao Paulo, in Florianopolis in Brazil. Was a really fun ride, but ended up shutting that down. Prior to that, spent time in another startup, which was actually a robotics startup. So I think you know me, but for a lot of folks who don't, you're going to see a very eclectic collection of things. I think what all of them have together is curiosity. What all of them have to commonly together is it's all about growth. It's all about doing something that I find interesting and where I see the growth potential. So that other startup was a robotic startup. Prior to that, I spent some time with StubHub, which is the world's biggest secondary market for event tickets. Back then, it was part of eBay. So I was part of that team who helped spin it out of eBay, basically, and sell it to a PE and merge it with another company for over $4 billion. That spent some time with Walmart, and I think we can maybe talk a little bit about that at length. Yeah. We've done some really cool things there. And prior to that, spent a lot of time with startups. Some were my own, some were other folks' startups. One, I'm very happy to say we're able to take public from really early stages. I spent 7 years there. Had a chance to see everything. What does it take to actually build a company and take it globally and generate revenue that was north of $1 billion, which back then was a pretty big deal, as well as with a few other smaller startups. Two of them had really great outcomes and got acquired. And then another one we kind of exited, but was also part of the demise and the burial of 4 other startups. Haggai, I think you know that better than most, but you learn so much. And you don't necessarily learn from what's quote unquote successful. You actually learn a lot more from those failures. So my DNA is I'm a doer, I'm a builder. I get excited about business. I get excited about growth. I get excited about opportunities it's always the convergence of 3 circles. The first, imagine that we're drawing 3 circles next to each other and we're looking for that overlapping Venn area right in the middle. It always starts with the customer. It always starts with a really deep understanding of the customer. It doesn't matter if it's B2B, because at the end of the day, the customer is a human being. And you got to really understand what they care about and what motivates them and what drives them. And then you want to understand the environment and you want to map their journey as customers, and then look for the points of friction and look for the points of frustration. And from there, those opportunities you're just going to stumble upon amazing opportunity. Yeah. The second circle is the company. You want to look at the business and you want to look at the assets that you have and you want to look at the assets that you want to have, and you want to look at the landscape. And you want to make sure that, again, I know just the cliche is the Wayne Gretzky cliche is you want to go where the puck is going, but it's actually pretty important. You never want to evaluate a business based on where it is today, but where it is going. Then the third circle is feasibility. Like, what does it take to actually build something and take it to market, whether it's from a product and engineering standpoint or from a go-to-market standpoint. So I love those 3 circles. I love thinking about them. I love pontificating. I love figuring out what is that sweet spot in between. And then when I figure it out, it's all about execution. And when you're in my type of role, which is typically startup-ish, whether it's a standalone startup or it's creating something similar to that in a much bigger company, then you have to also embrace failure because you're not always successful. So yeah, that's a little bit about
That's
me.
a lot. That's a lot. And I think what I do want to stress is that you do have a very unique experience. It's like, I mean, in this podcast, we talk to entrepreneurs and people who build stuff but most of them do it for their own company, and maybe they get acquired and they move to a new company. But you have this experience of doing it both for yourself and moving to a big company and also doing inside a big company. And I think that this entrepreneur or working in and doing entrepreneurship within an enterprise is something that not a lot of people have experience with, and I would definitely want to dive into that. But before we do that, let's talk a little about GoFundMe and specifically what you do in the giving economy, because I think this is something that a lot of people are not even aware of. Maybe a little about the company and this kind of unique role, but like I think I don't know a lot of people that even like touch the giving economy.
First of all, I'd say GoFundMe is a really, really, really amazing company. I'm humbled. I'm so humbled to be part of that team. It's also a fascinating market. You mentioned that, Haggai, the market. This is not one of those markets where you're going to find analyst reports and you're not going to find like detailed analysis and summaries.
It's not oil and gas.
No, it's not. No, it's not. It's even if you go to ChatGPT, you're not going to get a straightforward answer unless you give it the really, really right and accurate prompt. But insiders love to call that the giving market or the giving economy. And, giving is all about giving something, but not necessarily getting something tangible, physical in return. Giving has been around for millions of years, right? If you go back to ancient civilizations, giving has always been part of it. If you look at Judaism, if you look at Christianity, if you look at Islam, if you look at most other religions, you will see that giving is typically associated with, being a good person, being a good member of society, being able to help and support others. So giving has always been around. What a lot of people don't understand about that market, it's a business. It's a pretty large and sophisticated business with a lot of different players, with a lot of different nuances, ranging from regulatory oversight and requirements to different types of business models that I think we all know from other places, whether it's SaaS, whether it's commission-based or e-com related business models. The market is quite sophisticated, but it's somewhat under the radar market because a lot of what people do in that market is altruistic. It's philanthropic, right? That I think adds for me, it adds a really personal type of mission. After so many years of helping companies that I worked for, or my own companies, focus on generating revenue for the sake of just growing the business and the company. What fulfills me so much today is that there's 100% correlation between my efforts and how my company today makes money, and goodness that is delivered to people and to nonprofits.
Is that a value set? Is goodness a value set?
Yeah, 100%. And again, like I don't wanna throw any other company out there under the bus, but you're not gonna find a lot of companies where there is tight correlation between what they do to grow and goodness or good things that are delivered to other people. So, at a very high level, if you think of the giving market, the giving space, it has a few different verticals or a few different pillars. The first one is individuals helping other individuals. And this is really where GoFundMe, by the way, a lot of folks like to call it crowdfunding.
Yeah.
I don't, because crowdfunding is a mechanism, but it's not necessarily a mechanism that is used to deliver help and support. It could be used just, to buy stuff or to fund stuff. So there's a massive difference between the Kickstarters or the Indiegogos or the Patreons or so many other companies in the space, and what GoFundMe does. And I'll share with you a little secret, which is kind of interesting. So GoFundMe started 16 years ago, 15 and a half years ago. Story of the company is really amazing. Two mission-driven founders back in San Diego created a really amazing brand that became ubiquitous within a few years. What's interesting about it, it wasn't a tech play. It wasn't like no one there invented something really crazy that allows people to move money. It wasn't really a fintech company. What the company did, which is, I think, for you and I, we could appreciate it now, 15, 16 years later. But back in the day, I don't think a lot of people got it. What the company did, which was tremendous in my mind, is helping or normalizing asking for help. That is not trivial. That's a huge change in consumer behavior. Because prior to GoFundMe, let's say that my friend Haggai just broke his leg and he's in need of some medical aid and he can't pay the bill for whatever reason. I could go and help my friend, right? Even back then, 16 years ago, we still had PayPal. I could just, go and transfer funds to you digitally. And if I'm not able to do so, I can always open my wallet. I can send you money. I could wire money from my bank. Moving funds was not the challenge. It wasn't the issue. What GoFundMe created is a really trusted brand. And later that became an ecosystem that enables individuals to actually go out and say, hey, I need help. I need support, which is not easy to do.
Or for somebody else to do it for you, right?
Or someone could do it for you. Exactly. So fast forward a few years later, with some great VCs getting involved, the company really became ubiquitous. And if we kind of think about those years back in the day, we didn't have Instagram back then. TikTok certainly wasn't around. Snap wasn't around, but we had Facebook. And it wasn't even the early days of Facebook, but this was what I was calling the second wave of Facebook, where Facebook already had a mass market, where people already started using Facebook on an ongoing basis. And this type of content became viral because when you see someone who is in need, that's part of our DNA as human beings. People want to lean in and people want to support. And the content itself is always human-centered. So you get to hear about stories and it touches you. So GoFundMe was able to grow really, really nicely and really rapidly, thanks to a lot of those content platforms. And obviously that ecosystem evolved and so did GoFundMe. The other interesting thing that happened to the company And again, all great products are always built bottom up, where you're starting to see organic behavior of people using the product in a way that you didn't mean to use the product,
Yeah.
right? So the company back then, I wasn't in the company, but I say we because I'm so immersed in everything that we are and in the lore of the company. But we started seeing folks fundraising on behalf of nonprofits organically. The company, the platform, the solution wasn't even meant for that. And the funny thing is, in the US and many other places, when you fundraise for a nonprofit or the beneficiary is a nonprofit, you can get a tax receipt or you can claim tax deductions in your annual tax filing. But our system wasn't even meant to provide that. And people were still they were still using the system to fundraise, although there
Even
were
if I'm
no
not
tax.
getting the tax benefit.
Exactly. And obviously when we saw that, it's like, okay, there's a light bulb moment here. Clearly we need to provide that type of service. And, post a few acquisitions and some more changes. Fast forward, the company started providing tools for nonprofits. And it very quickly, very organically became a meaningful channel for people to support nonprofits and for nonprofits to basically reach out to more folks, grow their audience, and improve the way that they're digitally connecting with folks. COVID happened. The company, of course, became even more ubiquitous because so many people were in need of help. And I think it created another massive change in consumer behavior. And we started seeing GoFundMe becoming even more ubiquitous across the world, not just in the US. UK market is a fantastic example of that. The same goes to Germany, and the same goes to a company recently launched in Mexico. We're starting to see cultural shifts and changes in consumer behavior around the world. And at that point, GoFundMe decided to actually double down on that, realizing that there's so much more that could be done for nonprofits. GoFundMe decided to acquire a company called Classy, which focused on servicing typically US-based, typically larger types of nonprofits. Think Salvation Army. Those are really what we call internally enterprise nonprofits, and their needs tend to be a lot more complex, a lot more data, and a lot more nuanced fundraising and donor management, et cetera, a lot of integrations with different tools. So GoFundMe added that to its portfolio. For a couple of years, mostly didn't do a lot to integrate, mostly let the business run and learn. And all of us, we used that time to just meet with as many customers as we could, just learn and learn and learn and learn, and lend them a ear and hear about the challenges that they have. And coming out of that period, it was very clear to us that there is an even greater opportunity for the company. So I don't remember when, but a few months back, the company integrated those two platforms. And the company has a very robust roadmap looking at what more could we do. And we can maybe chat a little bit about it. A lot of it is still under wraps, but some of it has already been released, and I'm excited about it. In addition to all of that, GoFundMe also operates its own nonprofit. It's called GoFundMe.org. And I couldn't be more proud of how those three different, I would say, units connect and get together. And the first unit is the GoFundMe Classic consumer platform,
Yeah.
where one person helps another person. The second is the nonprofit platform, where individuals or nonprofits can connect. And then the third is our own nonprofit, GoFundMe.org. And I think the best example of that is the LA wildfires that happened earlier in 2025.
So that's actually interesting. So maybe that is the case there, because that's a massive event. So
It
how
is.
does one integrates to such a massive event?
It is a massive event. And it's also, again, it's just honestly just a humbling experience being there and being part of a team that spent 16, if not 20 hours a day for a good part of 2-3 weeks, just trying to help, just trying to be there and help people. Clearly, when that happened, we started seeing thousands of individuals who either lost their homes or lost their jobs, or their family members or close ones were having a challenging time. We've seen them reaching out to us and opening their own fundraisers. Believe it or not, there are also some bad actors who are trying to abuse that. So one of our most important missions when something like that happens is to vet those fundraisers as soon as we can and make sure that they are legit, and then try to give them as much exposure and as much amplification as we can. And obviously it's difficult.
That's actually a very interesting question. How do you verify? Like, how do you
We have
verify something real?
we have a phenomenal team. So it's a combination of tools and systems, and it's a combination of really great human beings that are out there on the phone. And I can't tell you how many challenging situations. Just imagine what it's like verifying someone who now basically lost a lot of their documents and basically may not even have a driver's license because it got burnt in a fire.
Yeah.
But we have a dedicated team of professionals who do that. And it's a big part of what you have to do, but it's not the only one. You also want to make sure that these guys can get support. So our company has built a lot of different tools. Some of them are Gen AI, some of them are more traditional ones. Just help people get the word out.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, in a time of trouble, people come together. We've seen that happen again and again and again and again. I don't want to steal the thunder of our CEO and tell his story, but just in short, our CEO lives in Altadena, which is right next to Pasadena. That was the center of one of the biggest fires. And it's just so inspiring to see him running between different shelters and just helping people. When you see your leader doing that, it obviously inspires everyone in the company to go and do the same. So we had that consumer side of the business with a lot of people reaching out. But then we have a lot of nonprofits that we work with very closely. And they were using our tools, and we were connecting them with others, and we were connecting them with the authorities. And we were staffing, again, at 150% capacity just to make sure they have everything that they need in order to provide support. And then we have our own nonprofit, and that gives us a lot of flexibility to be nimble and start releasing aid and start releasing funds to people. So basically 24 hours after the first fires broke out, we were already granting deploying capital, granting affected individuals and affected businesses on the ground, which was phenomenal. I think, if you kind of look at all of that in aggregate, our teams were part of delivering and mobilizing north of $250 million within a span of a couple of weeks, less than a couple of weeks.
Okay.
In total, it was way, way, way more than that. So that's one of those examples where a lot of things go wrong, but also how a lot of things can go right in order to help a lot of people in pain and in need. And I'm just saying, I'm blessed to be part of such a team. I'm blessed to be part of a group of people who are very driven and they're very passionate about what they're doing. And every minute matters. In so many other businesses, you can say, okay, it can wait until tomorrow or it can wait until next week. Not where so many people are in need of warm blankets or a place to stay or medical treatment, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's a really great example of how all of those different parts of the business come together. But for the most part, those disasters, unfortunately, we see more and more of them. And we're here. And we're ready to support whenever those things happen. So let's zoom out again. When you kind of think about the giving space, individual fundraising is one aspect of it, but it's a relatively small aspect of it. Nonprofit giving is much bigger. It's a market that's probably north of $600 billion, in the US on an annual basis. A lot of that giving is done offline, but also a big part of it is digital. And this is where folks like myself come in. Because my job is really to make life easier for givers, to make life easier for beneficiaries, and to also grow the pie. You kind of think about it, there is more that could be done and there's more support that could be delivered. So certainly areas that I focus on. And if you look at the different verticals in that space, one of them is what we call the SaaS for NPOs vertical. There are a lot of different types of services and tools that nonprofits use. but maybe 4, 5 of them are very bespoke. They're very specific to this market. One of those, is fundraising, and another one is CRM. And obviously, a lot of large nonprofits, they use Salesforce.
For the CRM for the people, for the donors,
Yeah.
or CRM for the beneficiaries?
For the donors. So yeah, so if you're thinking, so the customer here for the most part is a nonprofit. Actually,
Okay.
nonprofits of all sizes. It doesn't have to be large nonprofits. So what do they need, right, in order to operate? What's part of their stack? One part of their stack is fundraising tools. Another part of their stack is a CRM system. But what I'm saying is some use Salesforce or HubSpot, but there are actually a few market-specific CRM systems that are tailored to nonprofit companies' needs. Then another area is payments. And again, payments, we have payments in e-commerce, we have payments in so many other adjacent markets, but there are some very specific things that are unique to the giving space, and you do see a few payment players there. And then another one is all about data and how to think about donors or data in general in that space. So those are 4 or 5 main SaaS verticals where you get to see a lot of different players and different tools that are provided. And the business model is typically ARR, or the business model is typically transaction adjacent. Then another vertical, which I think everyone who's ever worked for a large US-based company is familiar with, is corporate giving. Corporate giving is typically when you are an employee and one of your perks or one of the engagement vehicles that you get as an employee is to potentially be part of a group with other folks, or potentially as an individual, donate funds to nonprofits of your choice. And the company could match all or part of those donations. And it's a pretty sizable business. It's a pretty sizable market. You have a few companies that operate in that space, and most Fortune 500 and honestly, a lot of the Fortune 1000 US-based companies offer that as a perk. Another huge vertical is called donor-advised funds. Donor-advised funds have been around for many years, but in the past 15 years, they're exploding. And today in the US, you can kind of think about them as,
what is that? I mean, for people who don't understand.
you can kind of think about it as a K for nonprofit giving. So typically, as we established earlier in this conversation, if I want to donate to a nonprofit, I'm going to get a tax receipt. And I can then, in my annual taxes, I can then use that to get some deductions or benefits. Donor advised funds basically allow you to put your money in an account. And once you've transferred funds to that account, you get that tax deduction on the spot. You don't necessarily need to
give it. Even
exactly.
if I get to actually give it.
So you could basically park the money in that account. Now, you can only move them funds from that account to a nonprofit. You can't get the money back. You can't do anything else with it. And historically, a lot of people were using that as just a better way to plan their taxes. And it exploded in growth in the past 2 years. I think it's probably over $200 billion these days.
Come? What was the driver of this growth?
For the most part, tax planning, wealth management and tax planning. And this market is dominated by some of the typical large investment players, whether it's Schwab or Fidelity or Vanguard or JP Morgan. And it's a pretty sizable market. And they see that as an adjacent or as one of those tools or one of those investment vehicles that they offer to their customers. And at the end of the day, it is part of the giving market because those funds could only be used for nonprofits. And in fact, on an annual basis, billions of dollars are being sent to nonprofits through those vehicles. So that's yet another vertical in that space. There's another vertical, which is almost like a microcosmos of the entire market. And that's what we call the faith-based vertical, which is where we see religious-oriented giving. And in the US, when most people talk about faith in the US, we mostly talk about Christian-based giving. And I think a lot of our listeners probably know that in Christianity, the concept of tithing is a pretty big deal, right? People who go to church on an ongoing basis, giving is part of their DNA, which is obviously a great thing. and is relatively close. It's not a small market at all. It's also probably higher than $200 billion on its own in terms of the funds that are being mobilized in that market on an annual basis. So that's a pretty sizable market. What's unique about that market? It has a lot of different players that provide all of the other types of SaaS tools that I just mentioned 2 minutes ago, right? So whether it's fundraising tools, or whether it's CRM, or whether it's payments and data, but most of them are focused on that vertical, on that area of the market. And churches are also evolving. It's fascinating to see how in the US, churches are embracing digital, and churches are appealing to a younger audience. So eventually, almost every church has some sort of a giving arm or a giving offering. So altogether, and I probably skipped on 2 or 3 other smaller niches in the market, but altogether, that comprises the giving economy or the giving market.
That's a lot.
And it is a lot.
Yeah.
It is a lot. It's a fascinating market. I mean, honestly, I've been there for a couple of years. I just, I keep learning, and I keep evolving my own thinking in that space. For us at GoFundMe, our mission is to help people help each other. And this is really the market where we operate. So our objective is to be really good friends with everyone in this market, but also to have our own take on products and what we could potentially deliver to folks.
So I mean, before we move on, I think like you really give us like a bit of a master class about like, GoFundMe and the giving economy, like a bit about your personal experience about this. I have this like, what part of human nature that you were exposed to, like surprised you the most?
It's a fantastic question because I'm surprised on a daily basis.
Okay.
And at the same time, maybe nothing is surprising at this point because you get to see so much. But I'll state the obvious. When something bad happens, people get together. Human nature, kindness is such a big part of human nature. The other thing, which is not surprising, but again, we're all familiar with that, is the concept of the internal, and I'm now just going to go a little bit deep into consumer psychology and again, human behavior. It's the concept of my intrinsic feelings about myself as a person, or in other words, am I a good person? Right? We keep asking ourselves that question every day. Am I a good person? Or sometimes you think that you're a good person, and then in a certain situation, you're asking yourself, is this the right thing? Or is this a thing that a good person would do, right? That moral compass. And the other, which is fascinating, is how do people perceive me?
Mm-hmm.
And understanding those two forces is always fascinating. I do a lot of interviews with human beings, either customers of our products or prospects, etc. And we have phenomenal research teams, and we spend a lot of time having these conversations. And you can see how giving plays a massive part. So people typically think about giving as a way to define how good they are as people. If I'm giving a lot, or if I'm giving less, or if a person in need needs me, of course I'm going to give. So it sounds very trivial to a lot of us, but it's actually not. Like the calculations that go through someone's head at a certain point where giving is on the table. For example, again, let's take the same example. My good friend Haggai just broke his leg. Am I going to give?
That guy needs to take care of himself better. He keeps breaking his
I know,
leg.
he needs to stop with the kickboxing. Am I going to give anything to Haggai? If I'm going to give, how much am I going to give? If I'm going to give Haggai $100, does that make me a good person? If I'm going to give 200, am I a better person? All of that happens in microseconds in your brain as you're contemplating, as you're thinking, and all of that. It's really interesting. One of the most interesting things in giving is people that actually don't have a lot of money are giving a lot more, right? Because of that reciprocity, because they're telling themselves all the time, if I am in need, I want other people to give to me, right? I can go on for hours and hours because I love consumer psychology. And again, those are the types of things that not necessarily surprise me as much as they fascinate me. The other part of it is the external view, or how do people perceive me? So I think all of us who are on LinkedIn are familiar with people sharing on LinkedIn, oh, I just, completed this course in AI, or I just did this and that. And obviously we know why people do that. And LinkedIn knows why people do that. It's all about showing others how good they are so that they would get some recognition from others. And, a lot of folks, they go to a nice vacation and they eat a very nice meal. And they're going to take photos of that or videos of that, and they're going to share it with their network. And it's not because the meal was so great, as much as because they want people to give them that feedback. And there's so many bodies of research about how dopamine gets injected when that happens, all of that fun stuff. It's very similar in the giving space.
So do people prefer to give with their name or to give without their name? So just let's take that example.
So the answer is it really depends. It really depends. It's an equation that has a lot of variables in it. And it's enough for you to change one of those variables. And again, I'll give you an example. But just to complete my previous point, how people perceive you as a giver is really important to people. So sometimes it impacts the amount that you give. It impacts again, like to your point, do I want my name on it or not? And it also matters, like, who are those people? Because there's some people that, you would prefer for them to think about you in a certain way. And there are other people where you don't really care. And I promised you an example. If we kind of think about giving in the context of social, right? In the context of, sorry, Haggai, I lost my train of thought. What was your question again earlier? Because I had that example and it just
I asked if do people prefer to give anonymously or with a name? That was the question.
Yeah. Sorry, my bad. So here's the example I want to give you. When we give, we have social circles in mind. So what are my social circles? One of those is my granular family. And then I got my circle of friends. And then I got my workplace. And then I got another circle, which may be related to a hobby of mine or a group of friends. The sports team that I follow, by the way, is a circle. Photography is a huge circle. Starts with my neighborhood and then my city, etc. I don't know if you remember the good old days, but Google used to have their own take on a social network. Do you remember that?
I remember, yeah. I actually tried to explain this to somebody who was born too late just recently. So I remember it, yeah.
It was all about circles, and I think they were spot on. So the way that people give, and you remember I said it's an equation with a lot of different parameters, the circle is a really important parameter. So I'll give you an example. If one of my colleagues at work is in need, and I'm going to give to that colleague, obviously I'm going to make my name visible. And obviously I'm going to share that in the company, whatever, Slack or other system. Because I want everyone around me to see that I'm supportive of another team member.
Yeah.
And I want to set an example because I am in a very closed circle where people actually care a lot. Now, it doesn't matter if they care because they care about supporting a person or they care about their own perception within that company. But a workplace is a really classic circle where those relationships are very close. I mean, think about it. How much time a day do you spend with your colleagues, right? A lot. You actually care about what they think about you, and you also care about them. Now, some folks are not going to maintain that relationship after they leave the workplace and go work for another company.
The context of the workplace, concept of time, yes.
Exactly. And it's just fascinating to see. A church is another very strong community. So I'm saying all of this to say the way that people show up, A, from a giving standpoint, but B, also from an asking for help standpoint, is very different in those circles. And the way that people give and the way that people support is really fascinating. So going back to your original question, what surprises me? It's those types of things. It's those conversations with people kind of trying to understand how they make decisions and what drives those decisions is just exciting, to be honest. It's exciting. It's learnings. It's constant learning. and there's so much more to be learned.
So I think this is actually a good segue to maybe take a step back, because I think you gave us a bit of a masterclass of a giving economy, and talk about entrepreneurship. Because again, like we said earlier, you have a very unique perspective of somebody who was in the startup world, wasn't even in the investment world, and also did entrepreneurial stuff within a large organization. So maybe it's a good way to start. Like, what's the difference? Like, if you had to give a cliff notes of like, what's the difference between starting your own company and being entrepreneurship, and being doing something entrepreneurial within your own company, and being an intrapreneur within a larger enterprise organization?
I will say this, a lot of the work is similar. At the end of the day, you have to, again, going back to those 3 circles that I'd mentioned earlier on this call, you know, the meat and potato is kind of the same, but the environment is very different. When you are an entrepreneur in your own company, every day is all about survival. And you know that if you're not going to be successful, and you know that if you fail, you may not live to see another day in this business. And by the way, also the reward, because if you're going to be successful and you're going to, you're going to grow and become a huge, massive company, whatever your desired outcome is, you know that you're going to reap a lot of those benefits. And your name is going to be on it, by the way, in terms of your legacy, etc. In a bigger company, I don't want anyone to kid themselves that, when you're an intrapreneur or whatever you want to call it, in a bigger company, it's the same. It's not the same. If you fail, you failed, but the company's going to live on. And if you're successful, then you're going to get your paycheck, and maybe you're going to get a bonus, or maybe you're going to get whatever, or great outcomes for the shareholders of the company, but you're certainly not reaping all of the benefits. And in terms of your legacy, no one's going to remember your name in a few years. And the reality is, for some people, it's not okay. Some people can't be employed. Some people love, doing their own thing for whatever reason. I don't have that. I'm not here for the ego at this point of my career. I'm really only driven by, getting shit done. I'm only driven by, could we see an interesting opportunity and go after it? Now, when companies think about growth, there is this, anyone who's ever, done an MBA or have been to an MBA course is probably familiar with a matrix. With a matrix that has 4 quadrants. That I think a guy called Ansoff came up with like 1 million years ago. And if you kind of think about growth for companies, we have our own version of that. And this is me just sharing how a lot of big companies think about growth. It's not necessarily anything profound or anything new to many of you guys listening. You kind of think about growth in 2 axes. The first axis is my customers, my audience. Or am I looking at the same audience, or am I looking at expanding my audience, reaching out to new audiences? And a lot of times when people think about audiences, they kind of think about it from a geographical standpoint. Well, I just launched my company in the US. Why don't I move to the UK or to Canada, which are English-speaking markets that are considered adjacent from a behavioral standpoint, et cetera, et cetera. Agreed. That's one really great way to think about expanding your audiences. I think it's boring, to be honest. I think like you got to do it, but it's more interesting to think about new demographics that you can go after. And there are a bunch of examples of how companies, I think Uber is a fantastic example of a company doing that. But that's one axis, your audience. Are you going after your existing audience, or are you looking to tap new ones? The second axis is about your portfolio of products. Are you keeping your portfolio and focusing on what you already have, versus creating new products or expanding that portfolio of products? And if you look at those 2 axes, you're going to land on 4 quadrants. The quadrant on the lower left side is what all companies do. They focus on their existing audiences and their existing products. And after they've reached maturity, then the game is all about optimization. It's all about understanding cost of acquisition over lifetime value. And it's all about squeezing, and it's all about optimizing debt. And the more mature the company gets, the more difficult this becomes. Challenge is, many companies and, our corporate graveyards are full of a lot of really big, successful companies that have done what I'm about to say. Many companies end up doing mostly that.
Okay.
They just focus on that. They're not expanding, but they're just focusing on the existing. And that is very short-sighted. Some companies, and I don't want to name any names because I've worked for a bunch of those, actually have issues with their investors and their shareholders. And they're telling them, no, we want to think about it quarter by quarter. We want to really make sure that we're nailing this and we're nailing that. And they're not really letting the team go
You mean
beyond and expand.
short-term view versus long-term?
It's short term that happens over many, many, many years, which is so funny.
Quarter by quarter. Quarter by quarter, you get to a decade.
Exactly.
After quarter by
Exactly.
quarter, you get to a decade.
And their flavor of doing more or innovating is typically at the fringe. It's not really part of their strategy. So if you kind of think about it from a budget allocation standpoint, you're going to see that about 95% of their budget is spent on this, what we are doing now. I call that playing defense. And the challenge you have is that when we see waves of disruption in the market, those companies get left behind because a younger and more hungry competitor could come in and quickly eat their lunch. So now we start to see a different breed of expansion. You're either catering to the same audiences, but now you're expanding your portfolio of products. So you're asking yourself, hey, is there anything I can offer my existing customers? Typically something that is adjacent. So I'm making it up. If I have a software for accountants that helps them do tax returns, what is another thing that accountants could potentially use? I'm making it up. CRM, right? So could I maybe marry that with a CRM offering? So I'm expanding our portfolio of products, but I'm still catering to the same audience. Typically, that's riskier than just playing defense and optimizing, but the reward is far greater. Because that's a classic 0 to 1. That means you don't have that. If you're building it, now you're moving from 0 to 1. If you're successful, there's a decent chance you can grow from 1 to 10 and then from 10 to 100. The other side of expansion is basically saying, hey, look at my existing portfolio of products. Could I go after new audiences? And again, this is where a lot of folks are like, let's go to a new geographic area. But this is also where you see companies saying, hey, is there anything else that I can offer these guys? Sorry, is there any other way for me to use this product with a new audience? So again, I gave the Uber example earlier. So for Uber, we started with black cars and it was very clear what their audience was. But at some point, they expanded to just everyday people and everyday users. But then they started offering Uber rides for teens.
Yeah.
And then they started offering Uber deliveries, just if I have a package I want to move from one place to another. So they gradually add those. It's the same infrastructure. Uber Eats I agree, it's a different animal, but for the most part, almost everything, Uber Eats to me is a little bit of a different product. So maybe it fits the first example. And maybe from an academic standpoint, you can say it's here or there. But when you're moving something from point A to point B, it's exactly that. It's the same product eventually. Then you can think about your audiences. So I really love that example. Then you have the fourth quadrant. By the way, so quadrant 2 and 3 are all about expansion, right? Then you have the fourth quadrant, which is go after completely new audiences with brand new products and brand new offerings. And that's not for the faint of heart. That's not for every company. If you're a Google, if you're an Amazon, if you're a Microsoft, if you're a Facebook or an Apple, and you have very deep pockets, and you have that motivation.
Let's do a driving car. Let's do construction technology. I'm in search, but I'm going to do GTA.
So I'm saying all of this to say that most companies, most enterprises kind of tend to think that way. Very few of them go to that fourth quadrant. Most of them, 100% of them focus on the first quadrant. And now the question is, out of their budget, how much are they allocating towards the first quadrant where you're just optimizing what you have versus expanding? And there's a lot of literature on it, but what I think personally, the sweet spot is 60 to 70 on your core, and then the rest for expansion initiatives. And you want to think about all of that as a portfolio of products, right? So you want to think about your expansion initiatives the same way that a VC would think of investing in companies, right? You're going to put in X number of dollars every year, and you're going to invest in 10 companies. And then out of those 10, within a span of, whatever, 5 years, 10 years, depending on the type of fund and your thesis, 2 of those 10 are going to be over the line. 8 are going to be complete failures and you're never going to see a dime back. Out of those 2, 1 is going to be very successful. And that's probably going to return your entire fund. And then the other one is going to be moderately successful. And that's going to open up a bunch of interesting new avenues, right? So companies think about it the same way. And I was very blessed to be in companies that either had that way of thinking or I was helpful in them embracing that way of thinking. We kind of do the same today at GoFundMe, but I was blessed to do the same at larger companies like eBay and Walmart. And I had the opportunity to take some of those bets with them and build those things. And some were even quite successful.
I want to take a bit what I heard you say and kind of try to structure it. It's like, again, from the perspective of you, the individual that wants to make a difference and being in the product. You say, so one thing, again, you started saying about the psychology of it, right? So one is that your name in the door, for better or worse, the ups and downs, the depressions and the highs, the economics, the payouts, and the despair. It's entrepreneurial, and if you're doing it within a large company, you might have even a bigger effect or smaller effect, but you actually, but you don't have the same psychology, right? One is one. Yes. Second thing I heard you when you talk about the strategy, and again, this is what I heard. You might not have meant this. Is that for an entrepreneur to actually be able to succeed within the large enterprise, there needs to be a strategic decision by that company to put somewhere between 30 and 40% of our budget on growth and expansion, because otherwise, you just don't have the resources to do things. Is that correct?
Yeah. It could be less than that, and then you're going to have less initiatives under your portfolio. So even if the org allocates 10%, you're just going to be able to squeeze in less initiatives with that type of budget and resources. But yeah, for the most part, I think that companies that allocate 30 to 40, and honestly, 20, 25 is also not the worst thing in the world. But companies that are able to allocate that and can build those muscles, you know what the biggest challenge is? It's, again, talking about behavior and psychology. It's for large companies to, I wouldn't say embrace failure, but to acknowledge that failure could happen. It's not trivial at all. If you go to a big company and you're going to tell your CEO, hey, I'm going to try and do something that could fail. If it works out, it's going to be great, but it could fail. The first thing, maybe even not the CEO, just think of, senior C-level officers. Like, what's the first thing they're going to think about? It's like, how is that going to make me look like? Because a lot of their incentives as well are all about, again, the numbers and the metrics.
This quarter's revenue.
This quarter, is that going to make my numbers? Is that going to make my numbers look bad? In mid-level management in big companies, it's even worse because, again, they're not necessarily incentivized in the long term, and they keep thinking about, okay, what's going to be my next role in the company? They do not want to have a failure under their belt. So
it's very interesting what you said, because I want to give 1 second the contra example, because I know from from my experience, personal, but also talking to other entrepreneurs, I know I know. If I have information and go, I usually am able to know if the entrepreneur failed gracefully. I mean, if it was a quote unquote good failure, right? It's like this person or persons did everything right, but they didn't succeed. I mean, everything reasonably right? It's like the technology was too early, but they did everything right. Microsoft, after they figured it out, Microsoft or Google came in and poured money in, but they did everything right. Where it was so many, again, there are about examples, and in many ways, you are very respectful with people. You want to hire them, you want to team up with them, and also I know investors that want to say, shame, call me when you do your next startup. We'd love to invest. I've had these conversations, right? And I know people are having conversations. And what you're describing is not that in many ways.
No, I mean, again, it's all about human beings and how human beings think
Yeah.
and feel and operate. And no one in bigger companies, the famous saying, no one gets fired for choosing IBM. It's kind of the same, right? No one wants
Well,
to.
back when. Today, I don't know what it is, but it's like that.
I know, just show you how
Yeah, how
young
old we
both of
are.
us.
How old we are,
Both of
yes.
us are. So people are afraid to make that, bolder decision because they do not want failure to be attached to their name. Now, here's the reality. Like you and I know very well, most startups fail. Most of those ideas are not gonna be successful. There is a dynamic that I think everyone is very familiar with in big companies, which is trying to ride waves and looking at at the buzzword of the day. And a few years ago, it was blockchain. So everyone was trying to fit blockchain into their business. And then it became, actually before blockchain, it was cloud. And then it became blockchain. And then it became something else. And now obviously we're all seeing the AI hype.
AI
I'm
something.
saying AI something. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning that is those types of, entrepreneurial endeavors are easier to get out of the gate in a big company. And those are things that big companies are more likely to bet on, not because they're the right things. Oh my God, Haggai, I can tell you,
Because all the lemmings are doing.
because everyone else is doing it and their shareholders are in many cases expecting them to do so. I can't tell you how many examples I've seen very closely in the past few years of companies basically forcing AI into what they're doing just for the sake of having a really great quarterly earnings call where they can tell everyone that that's what they're doing. But I'm saying all of this to say, let's go back to the thinking of big companies. It's not easy. It's not easy to convince a big company to move to that portfolio approach where they're taking a lot more risks. It's not easy for them to convince their board and their shareholders that that's what they want to do. Now, thankfully, many companies today are thinking that way. And those companies are companies that you see doing more and trying more. And the other thing is, a lot of companies are also kind of used to the build by partner type of an approach,
Yeah.
where many of them are actually afraid of building. They're afraid of building. It's like, oh my God, it's going to be much easier to buy, or it's going to be much easier to partner. And I think, as long as it makes sense for that company, it's fine. Like the model doesn't require you to build. If you know how to buy, if you know how to integrate post buy, then by all means go and do that. But it's the same old model and it works. So my experience in different companies has been great. I have to say, like, as I said earlier on, I was blessed to be in the right companies with the right environments that allowed me to go and build, sometimes also, but to go and build. And I can give you one example that I'm really excited about. It's a great story of growth within a huge company. Actually, it's the biggest company. Back then, it used to be the biggest company in the world. It was Walmart. So Walmart is massive. And what a lot of people don't know about Walmart is that it's actually a very large global company. Walmart owns and operates brands and assets and supply chains and a lot more in a few countries across the globe. One of their biggest, Canada obviously is a big market,
Yeah.
and they used to have a pretty big stake in the UK, and they used to do some stuff in China and South Africa, etc., etc. One of their biggest markets was Mexico, still is.
Yeah.
In Mexico, back in the day, I remember that their subsidiary was, I think, along the lines of a 55 billion company on its own. So I'll repeat that. It's 5 and 5 next to each other, 55 billion. That's a pretty big
That's a
company.
pretty big company by itself. That's a Fortune 100 company by itself.
It's a huge company by itself. And that company operated 4 different retail brands in the Mexican market. One retail brand catered to wealthier people, smaller types of supermarkets in larger cities. Another one was more about bigger warehouses in more rural areas and cheaper, basically, a product. And another one was the more classic flavor of Walmart that we would recognize in the US. And another one was the more classic brand of Sam's Club, which is kind of like a Costco. So These guys were doing a phenomenal job. They got to see about 80% of the Mexican population in one of their 4 brands. It doesn't get any bigger than that. And Mexico is a huge country. It's a huge market, very distributed, many different provinces and states and areas. And Walmart was well penetrated into all of them. My job was to help on the e-commerce side. And when I joined the company, myself and a few other folks were tasked at trying to understand why conversion on our e-commerce pages wasn't great. And I did the only thing I know how to do. I started speaking to people, to customers, and just, trying to get to the bottom of it. And we quickly learned that there were no bugs in the system. There were no tech challenges. It was all about people's relationships with their credit cards. We quickly found out that because, we're an e-commerce play, back then, you kind of rely on credit cards. You got to pay with a credit card. Isn't that trivial? It kind of works for us in the US, right? So, but it wasn't the same in Mexico. In Mexico, there was a massive population that was underbanked, and they just didn't have credit cards. Part of that was because they did not trust the credit card institutions. Part of that was because, and by the way, it meant that it's a classic cash economy. So people literally save money in their mattresses or under the floor or in different places. Part of that was because there weren't a lot of great technologies out there to allow them to do stuff. So we started going deeper and deeper, and we realized, hey, maybe one of the most interesting unlocks for us in the market is not going to be, you remember quadrant number 1, which is all about optimizing what you have. It's not going to be trying to improve the design of the checkout page to make sure that more people put their credit cards in. Maybe we need to go and expand. Maybe we need to go to those users, right? And go and offer them something that is adjacent, that they don't have today, that could help us significantly grow. And we landed on a digital wallet. And I spent 6 months on the ground in Mexico. And I wasn't living in Mexico, but I traveled every 3 weeks and had a phenomenal team of researchers, etc. And we went really deep, and we spoke to so many different people. And as we were doing that, we realized that it's not just about credit cards here and credit cards there. It's about the actual use cases. And I'll tell you about one of those use cases, which I found fascinating. It's utility bill payments.
Yeah.
So here in the US, if it's that time of the month and I need to pay for my mobile bill or my gas or electricity or water, whatever, it's an afterthought. I probably set an auto payment at some point. Maybe I did it directly from my bank. Maybe I did it directly through my credit card. And voila, magically it happens. I get an email, I get a text.
The credit card ferries take care of it.
What we found in Mexico, that most of the population didn't have any of that. A, because most utility providers did not provide that. And B, because of their own expectations, like they weren't expecting to get that.
Yeah. And also they were carrying cash, like the cash had to be taken out of a mattress and physically taken somewhere.
Exactly. And one of my best exercises is customer journey mapping. When you actually put yourself in the shoes of a customer and you record their actual journey, like literally what are the steps that they're taking? And then for every one of those steps, you look at 3 dimensions. Dimension number 1 is, what do they do? What do they actually do? Do they actually click this or click that? Or if it's a physical journey, do they walk here, open that door, whatever? The second is, what do they think? Which means, as they're doing something, what is the process? What's the thinking process? What are they weighing and how are they thinking? And the last one is, what do they feel? That's the emotional aspect. And that's what drives all of us, right? At the end of the day, we had teams and we mapped that journey. And here's a true story. So a typical person in Mexico, it doesn't matter if it's in Mexico City, which is a super big modern city, beautiful city, or if it's in a more rural area, in a smaller village, they all do the same. They walk out of their house. We can start counting the steps, by the way. Step number 1. And whether it's, by the way, raining or shining, it could be super cold, super warm, rain or not, they're going to still do that. Maybe they need to take their baby with them because they can't leave the baby at home. Maybe their dog is with them. It's not the most convenient thing. So they walk out of their house. They go to a local convenience store. In Mexico, one of the biggest brands is called OXXO, OXXO. It's a massive chain. But Walmart also had its own chain called Bodega Aurrera, and there's also a 7-Eleven, etc., etc. So there is a convenience store in Mexico. It's very typical to markets like Mexico, Guatemala, but also in Southeast Asia. You're going to see a lot of that in Thailand and the Philippines, etc., right? So you're going to walk to that store. You're going to stand in line, and then you're going to, so that's step number 2, right? And then you're going to get to the cashier. Then you're going to whip up your wallet and you're going to take out a note. And that note has a very long number. You're going to give the cashier that number, maybe 10 digits, 14 digits, and you're going to cross your fingers that she's going to get all of them right. And then you're going to give her cash. Say it's 100 pesos or 200 pesos. And you're going to give her that cash. And then you're going to hope that the cash that you gave corresponds with your balance based on some piece of paper that you got at some point. And then she's going to start punching all of that in, and she's going to give you a receipt. Not a receipt saying that your bill has been cleared, but a receipt saying that you actually paid her the money.
Paid money.
And then you're going to go. So I probably counted 5 or 6 steps. Now, when we in the US kind of think about it, it's like, as I said, I probably just said it once and I forgot about it. Or maybe I get an email, I click the email, and then I click another button and voila, the money is out. So what we just...
Your level of certainty and ease is amazing in the US, and your amount of effort and uncertainty is very high in what you described in Mexico.
What I just described is classic example of friction, right? We can, I can give you the Uber example. It's literally identical, right? It's like the magic of pressing one button and immediately getting rid of all of the friction. But friction is not enough. Friction is one thing that you need. The other thing that you need is frustration. Because if there is no frustration, if the person doesn't feel bad about doing it,
it's not going to do something.
It's not meaningful enough. They're not going to do anything about it. So my assumption was people are frustrated because the friction is there. It's clear. We were speaking to folks and they were telling us, what they're doing. And we asked them, we said, so what if we gave you, that's, by the way, the classic question when you interview people is the magic wand question. So what if we gave you a magic wand? What would you wish for? Or what if we told you that you don't have to go to the store and do all of that? And you could just sit in your couch at home and from the convenience of your house, just click 2 buttons and make all of that happen immediately. And they told us, no, we love going to the store. That's where we get our leche, our milk. That's where we do our, ongoing grocery shopping. It was a social thing.
Yeah.
People didn't feel like it's frustrating for them. They were actually okay with that friction. In fact, they embraced the friction. And I found that to be insane. And long story short, I know we don't have a lot more time, but long story short, we ended up building that product and releasing it. It became a massive success. But here's what we learned. We learned for that population, that's not the silver bullet.
What was the product? Do spend a minute.
Yeah. So the product itself was a digital wallet because 80% of the population was visiting us, were visiting our stores. They could basically put cash into a digital app. They could give us cash and we would load their app with money and they can then use that money to pay their bills. And we realized that bill paying was, as much as I loved it, it was a great feature. That wasn't the biggest challenge for them. And now you would think maybe the story ends here and we ended up not building anything, etc. But no, what we realized, it was a problem. It wasn't a widely spread problem. It was a problem for a certain part of the population. So we actually made a really well-informed decision to go after that population in a really concentrated way and then expand later, what you would call a land and expand type
who had the
strategy.
problem? What was the problem?
So the reality was it was people who were a little bit more educated. By the way, many of them had credit cards, but the friction of using and updating credit card, our product was way better. So they had both. So they had that frustration aspect and etc. And the good news, Mexico is a huge market. So even if you're not solving something for a mass audience and it's still a niche, that niche is still a few millions of people. So that's how we started with that feature, and it worked really well. But then what was the other thing we found out? That same population was also frustrated about paying for Uber, paying for Microsoft Xbox, paying for a lot of other things and services, Netflix, by the way. So we ended up partnering with all of those guys. We started adding them into our app and merchandise, and basically reduced all of the friction required for you to pay for an Uber or sign up for a Netflix, et cetera, et cetera. So that was our launch strategy, and it worked really well. And then later on, we expanded to more financial services and to other features. By then, I was no longer with the company. I moved on, but I'm so happy to say.
I mean, you're smiling. You're talking about it and you're smiling.
It's one of my babies. It's one of my babies. That product today has probably about 18 million people using it on an ongoing basis. And not only that they're using it, it became the 5th brand. You remember I started a story. I said that, the company had 4 brands in that huge market. So I'm happy to say I built that 5th brand for that company. And again, I obviously I'm taking credit. I wasn't the only one, but I remember very vividly how all of this was just an idea on a paper napkin, and it became a pretty big business for not just the company in that market, but for the global company of Walmart. So that's an example of how you could be an entrepreneur in a much bigger company, and none of it was easy in terms of the red tape and the bureaucracy and how to operate in a big company. I was very lucky to have an amazing boss and to have an amazing environment around me that allowed me to, go out and make mistakes and be bold.
Takeaway. Let me ask you this in this way. So we talked about macro, and you give an amazing example and a very exciting example of a success, and we also talk about the difficulties. But let's take it down to the individual. Let's say if you met today young Haggai, right, the one that wants to do those amazing things within a big company. So what would be the advice you would give your younger self today, right? The one that's starting out. I want to work in a big company. I want to make a big change in the world. But so what should I don't know, what's the magic checklist, or like, I don't know, what are the things that I must adhere to increase my chances to succeed?
It's a really great question. I think the first piece of advice is try to quickly understand if the company has that type of appetite.
Okay.
Going back to what we talked about earlier on, it's not trivial. Like a lot of companies would say, we want to do more, 0 to 1. We want to do more new stuff. In fact, I interview a ton of candidates. Like on a given year, I probably speak to hundreds of candidates that are interviewed for different roles. And so many of them tell me, oh, we've done 0 to 1. And I'm like, okay, but what specifically did you do? Oh, we launched this feature. No. When we talk about 0 to 1, it means that the company needs to make a very clear and purposeful decision that they're now going to invest in something that is very likely to fail. But should it succeed, it will be a very meaningful addition to their business and to their portfolio. It sounds very trivial. Most companies are not able to get. Most companies are not able to get out of their old ways of, okay, how do we make decisions? So, Haggai, how do you decide what your budget this year should be? Oh, we should take last year's budget and we should basically see if we used all of it. And if we did, then great. Let's add 5% to it because that's what the market. No. Like that's not the right way to run strategic analysis about your opportunities as a company, right? So many companies don't do that. So many companies are focusing on that first quadrant of our business today. They're not looking at adjacencies, that they're not looking at expansion opportunities. The companies that do are the companies that you want to join. So again, I still remember my conversation with, before I joined StubHub, with the CEO of StubHub back then. And again, it's a multi-billion-dollar company. It's huge. And I still remember we were sitting in a coffee shop and chatting, and we were having this very same conversation you and I are just having. And her eyes lit up. And she was basically banging on the table. She said, yes, this is what we want to do. So I'm saying all of this to say, those are the types of companies. And by the way,
so first you have to choose.
You have to choose
the right partner in a way, right?
Exactly.
Don't expect to change the company. You have to one that's already open to it, and at least open to it, if not already executing that.
You put it so well. 100%. I think the second thing is learning to speak in the right way in a company, which I have to say I'm not great at. Maybe part of it is my upbringing, and maybe part of it is my cultural background, but I'm not the most, refined individual when put in certain meetings with the board or with other folks, because I like to say it, I like to tell it how it is. And I like to cut to the chase. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes people like me are seen as very abrasive in bigger companies, and it really matters because eventually you want to convince people. There's a lot of selling here that you need to do internally. The second thing is people need to trust you, and people tend to trust what is familiar to them. So one of my biggest learnings is do not come out, guns blazing and here's what we're going to do and here's how we're going to do it. And why? Because I said so and I know everything. No. You have to, first of all, from a narrative building standpoint, always start with the customer. I have seen zero executives that are not fascinated and are not super engaged when you start talking about your customers and your audiences. So always share those stories, those anecdotes, those learnings. First of all, that's going to get you a seat at the table for sure. But the second thing is learn how to communicate internally, learn how to build relationships. In a big company, it's so important. I came from startups. I came from companies where you didn't need that coding. You didn't need that varnish. You would just go in very unvarnished and you would just
You didn't need that
get to the point.
coalition building. In a way, you have to build a coalition.
Exactly. Yes, sir. Exactly. So, and I wasn't good at that. I think I'm better today. I'm not amazing at it. I see some of my colleagues who are phenomenal at that. I still consider myself a person who focuses on, doing the right thing at the right time, not necessarily communicating it the right way, but communicating is critical. So my second piece of advice would be that. The third piece of advice would be try and understand the mechanics of the organization. Every organization has its own mechanics. And another maybe way of putting it is internal politics and I'm allergic to that. I don't like it at all. This is certainly not my strong suit. I don't wake up in the morning thinking, who do I need to talk to in order to, again, build that coalition or figure out the right way to position something. But that could be a difference between getting a great project. It's going to bring tremendous value to the company approved versus not. So I have been in a few companies where some of those were a little bit more extreme, and I've seen a lot of great opportunities go to waste. And I've seen a lot of executives, by the way, who shut me down and shut my ideas down. And 6 months later became the biggest champion because of all of the right or because of all of the wrong reasons. It doesn't matter. I have a talk that I give in conferences from time to time. And I talk a little bit about what does it take to change a culture in a big company? What does it take to make the product, the company a little bit more product led? And I always give those examples of how, I went into a board meeting and was completely shut down and I came out of it like, oh my God. And then 3 months later, same meeting, same people, I came out as like a champion. And all of that was just being able to tell a better story internally. And all of that was being able to communicate and to create the right coalition. So as much as I'm not great at it and as much as I did, this is the advice I would give my younger self. But everything else, Haggai, honestly, it's not different. It's the same, like building products that are good and talking to human beings and understanding them, it's the same thing everywhere.
It's the same thing. And I would say and I think this is something that a lot of, I think a lot of people that haven't had scars on their back don't understand. Look, I've worked in IBM, if we speculate a while, like way back, and I've done entrepreneurial things, but in the end of the day, you need to know how to sell. And I say sell, sometimes people say as a negative connotation.
Yeah.
But to sell is to be human, right? To sell is to human, if it's in politics, if it's your idea, if it's your thing. And if it's important to you, if it's important to you, like if you're an artist or you're a business person, whatever it is, you at the end of the day have to get your message across and you have to drive people. So look, as an entrepreneur, it's not as, let's say, as a solo entrepreneur or entrepreneur in the beginning of a small company. Yeah, you don't have to convince people to do the stuff, but you still have to convince the employees. You still have to convince the market. You still have to convince your customers. You have to convince your vendors. You have to convince vendors. You have to convince your bank. You have to convince your investors. There's so many people you have to convince, and nobody's helping you. So so yes, in the enterprise, you have to convince your colleagues and the organization to help. But if you do that, they will help you with all the other things we just mentioned. Like, you won't have to do it alone, right? In many ways, you don't have to do it alone.
I couldn't agree more. And it's such a critical, point, and it's such a critical quality. So many of us are driven by, okay, we want to do the right thing, and we're going to communicate the right pitch and the right message, and everyone's just going to get on board. And you realize, no, it's not like that. You have a perspective and other people have another perspective, and you really need them to be bought in. The other thing that people don't think about is, what are the motivations of the other folks that you're talking to? And the folks that you want to get on board. Maybe that person maybe the CEO that you're just chatting with, maybe she just came out of a meeting with her board where the board reprimanded her for not doing X and Y and Z. And as much as you think that's our idea,
or whatever,
exactly.
where was your AI initiative or anything like that, right?
Exactly. So I think that's a level of maturity that we all need to get to, and that understanding that, yes, it's really about communication, and it's really about selling, and it's really about timing. And the reality is, I wake up in the morning with like 50 ideas, and maybe 90% of them are crap. And out of the ones that are amazing, I'm probably going to be able to get maybe one across the line here with myself, like internally.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to probably go and entertain that idea with a few people. And most chances that idea is not going to go anywhere. But once in a blue moon, one of those ideas does get over the line, and then we're able to get the right, again, coalition with the right messaging, etc. And then we get the right allocation of budget, given everything else. And then we go out and we do it. And even then, most chances it's not going to be successful. So just think of the small fraction of those things that can actually come into light and make an impact for a big company. In a startup, I wake up in the morning with an idea, and I'm going to subject the rest of the company to my crazy ideas, and we're going to go out and have some fun with it. So
Actually,
that's the reality.
I just want to say one more thing about that. So actually, I heard this like relatively successful entrepreneur says about, but his moment of wisdom is he realized that he has too many good ideas, and because he kept abusing his team and the company with ideas, they were always between, because it takes time, even if it's an amazing idea, right? It takes time for the team to understand, for the systems to work, for the learnings to happen, for the software to be, whatever it is. But he was constantly punching the company with innovation. And the most impactful thing he said he did, he just said, like, I'm making one change a quarter, like one major change a quarter, no matter how many good ideas I have, because it just doesn't have, because I need the system to stabilize. That was a very
Amazing.
interesting. That was a very interesting thing. It said, it's like, and then once we like improve by 20%, only then do I, like, 20% market share, 20% improvement, whatever it is, only then do I bring in my next crazy idea into the play. So it's interesting because it made me think of kind of exactly what you
Agreed.
said.
I love it. It shows maturity. It shows, a good understanding of all of those forces that are in play.
It's amazing. So, hi, before we wrap up, it's like two key questions. Like, if it's like, is there anything you want people to know that it's important to you, any shout outs you want to make so people hear you know?
I think I've alluded to that earlier on. I'm not gonna shout. I'm just gonna say, as I get older, I'm not a spring chicken anymore, right? None of us is. I start thinking about not just what I could do for businesses, for the sake of growing and making more money and all of that, but also helping and impacting others. I encourage everyone to try and do more of that. I think the world's gonna be a little bit of a better place. You don't have to necessarily give money that you don't have, but just, give your attention, some of your mind share, lean in where you can, wherever you can. I think amazing things are going to happen. And my last couple of years, I've been really grateful to be in a place that allows me to do more of that. And I'm building a lot of tools that are going to enable everyone listening here to do more of that as well. So that would be my kind of, shout out.
If people want to find you and reach out to you, where should they do that?
Very easy. My last name is very unique. If you're going to see anyone who has the last name Habot or Habot, they're probably a remote, distant relative of mine. So just find me on LinkedIn. Very easy to get a hold of me. I'm always happy to chat with folks. It's Hai, Hai, last name Habot, Habot. Love to hear from all of you guys. Haggai, as always, it's a pleasure. Always enjoy these conversations.
Yeah. I mean, we started with a smile and we're finishing with a bark and a smile.
Oh, you can hear my dog barking. Yes. I think she is anxious for me to get back and give her some attention. So, Harry, thank you so much. This has been really great.
Same here, Chai. All the best.
It's a wrap. This Haggai's podcast episode ends here, but you don't. Now, is it crazy to think that you know somebody who'd love this episode? Share it with them, and they'll love you for it.